Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 98 of Gorilla Radio Show. As always, we are your hosts, Austin, Chandran, and Greg, but today we're joined by a very special guest, one whose work you may have seen, but you just don't know it yet. If you've seen Chimp Week, Planet Earth, or Almost Human with Jane Goodall, then you are familiar with the work of our guest, Mr. Bill Wallauer. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? I guess with Jane. I mean, Jane I'm originally from Arizona and moved to Oregon when I was a kid, and grew up in the mountains of northeastern Oregon and southwestern Oregon. And after university, I joined the Peace Corps and went to Tanzania and met Jane Goodall at a talk. And Peace Corps changed my life, and I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you don't know what to do right now and things seem like a little bit out of sorts. This was after a kind of rough time in the 80s, and I just wanted to kind of get out of the country and see the way other people live, see other cultures, other wildlife. I was a big wildlife person, and so Tanzania was perfect for me. And I made friends with Jane. I did some volunteer work for her, and I went back to Oregon, studied spotted owls for a while, and then Jane asked me to come out and join her in her field site. And, a lot of people want to kind of follow in Jane's footsteps. That wasn't on my radar as a kid. It wasn't something I even, thought about. And it was a dream that was beyond my wildest dream. And it's still to this day the best job in the world. She's the most amazing mentor and person on the planet. I had a chance to listen to a few bits about your Jane Goodall episode, and there's so many misconceptions about her. She's not nice to the local people, and yet she loved the local people. The whole staff at Gombe are local Tanzanians studying the chimps, absolutely as enthralled and expert about the chimps, even more so than Jane and I. And she does a lot of humanitarian work there, around the village work around Gombe National Park. And it was her philosophy that, she did bring, a lot to science, but also to humanitarian work and conservation work. You can't do conservation without involving and benefiting the local people. And she's the person who made that blueprint. So anyway, that's a little bit about my background and so forth.
Yeah, no,
awesome. Thank you.
It's something we've talked about a lot. We've almost had 100 episodes of this show. This show's like really grown alongside us as we've gotten older, learned more. I started this when I was in my bachelor's degree, finished my master's last year, but yeah, there's a whole lot of I'd say Jane Goodall is probably one of the most influential, well-known wildlife scientists that I can think of, and
it's hard to put any other names up there with her.
Yeah, I can't think of very many.
In my whole lifetime, there was Jacques Cousteau, Carl Sagan, Jane Goodall. There are just a handful. When I was a kid, it was the Cousteau specials, Jane Goodall in the magazines and on National Geographic. Carl Sagan and his amazing work with Cosmos. Which I don't know if that hit your guys' radar, but it's amazing stuff as well.
Yeah.
But,
I honestly think maybe our generation might be more familiar with the Neil deGrasse Tyson reboot.
Totally. He's up there as well.
Yeah. I think that's the first one that I watched. Then I went back and watched the Carl Sagan one. I will say I think I prefer the Sagan one, but I won't. I'm not going to say too much. I don't want any fanboys, any astrophysics fanboys.
They're going to tell us what to know.
Don't get on their bad side. For sure.
They take a real mean bite.
They do. This show has been incredible, I think, more so for Chandra and I than for Austin, as we have become unwilling experts in the field of primatology. I know more about anthropology and primatology now than I ever would have expected getting a degree in political science and then working in finance. It's an insane, it's a privilege. It's really awesome to know these things and to learn more about the world around us.
And it comes naturally, I think, by nature. We're ethologists. Jane was an ethologist, not a primatologist, the study of behavior and the science of behavior. And, we all study one another just for our own survival. From the time we can observe one another, we are measuring facial expressions, postures, This is long before we can speak, and this is for our survival. And so you are all primatologists at heart, and so it's not surprising that you might reluctantly, some people, because of the way they're portrayed in the press, don't particularly like primates, and some people, well, they're so like us, they almost bother me. I hear that a lot, and yet, if you got a chance to see them in the wild and become as familiar with them as you are to friends, family, animals in your lives, dogs and cats who you share your life with, that relationship and connection is just as deep, if not more so. The first time I saw a great ape in the wild, a gorilla in Zaire, it just changed my life. I felt like I think for the first time as a farm kid coming from Oregon, animals are utilitarian in their food, and you don't really think about their emotional capacity. You don't really think much about, their state mentally. Are they suffering? Are they happy? You just do. You just grow up in your family and do as your parents do, and you don't really question much unless you're Jane Goodall. And she broke down those barriers, and who would have thought? Dad had a ranching background, and I studied range ecology, and I figured that I would probably work for the BLM and Forest Service, and do kind of wildlife range restoration kind of work. But when I started studying primates and spending time around first grade apes, those walls between us and them just crumbled. And I realized that the language is the only separator. The emotional capacity of gorillas, chimps, right through the animal kingdom. I don't even like this kind of linear hierarchy that we are at the pinnacle of human exceptionalism, and then there's the great apes, and they lump us with them. I have no doubt that right through the animal kingdom, those emotions and connections, and even emotional reactions to forces of nature, and reactions to sunsets, birds lining up on the beach, looking at a sunset. Well, why do they do that? Why do chimps dance in the rain? They do. These are emotional reactions to forces of nature, and they're really the foundation of our spirituality. And that doesn't come from us. That comes from distant, like long before primate relatives. So. Yeah. And as the Native Americans say, and the indigenous people, we're all brothers and sisters. Like, there is no separation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to start jumping us ahead to our prepared questions and stuff, but and this is very far along in the document. I thought we would talk more about some intro stuff, but you already jumped at, I think, the heart of a lot of conversations we've been having recently on the podcast, which is about this distinction between these different types of sciences, or these different approaches to life sciences, natural sciences. So there's, I'm sure you're familiar with this very, I want to say, but Western, academic American and European institutions have this approach, this idea of we are people, we are humans, and we have to observe these animals, primates, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, they're subjects. They need to be analyzed without care and understood in the way they act, and we need to figure out why they're acting like that. And we've been talking about, this is kind of we've been talking about, to cite something specifically, a Japanese kind of philosophy within life sciences, where you kind of allow yourself to project onto these subjects, these animals, and kind of just find out where things line up and where things kind of deviate, and you don't make this really hardline distinction between yourself and the thing you're observing. So how has this idea you're talking about, we're all brothers and sisters, how have you taken that idea into your work as as a scientist, as an advocate, as a camera operator and a cinematographer?
Well, I think both Jane and I very much respect our academic colleagues, and she had her PhD in ethology, and her brought amazing findings to the general public, but she still thought that a single anecdotal event can tell us more about chimps than a 2-year-long study about their behavior. How many times does so-and-so groom so-and-so? And what we find like over and over and over as just observers of behavior versus strict animal behavioralists and scientists is that with any group and community, you're going to find something different 2 years from now that you are right now, with the different changing personalities as individuals grow. And so, you can do a study at a field site and get your PhD and add something to science, but you could go back 5 years later and have completely different findings. And so how valuable really is that single study? I think what it tells us is we're just scratching the surface and we don't understand very much. And I would much rather be a cinematographer and a naturalist than an academic. Academia, I think, it kind of puts you into a box. And you have to do these things. Your study has to be, your colleagues have to tell you that you are worthy, and there's all this these politics behind it. It's pretty yucky, really, and it's very political. Not surprisingly, we're a very political species, and I find value in it, but I prefer maybe an Eastern or indigenous philosophy that there is much value beyond their behavioral studies about them, or just their ecological niche is just amazing. Like there's so many relationships that we don't know about chimps. Like their value is seed distribution. We haven't touched that. It's all about who's grooming whom in politics, and men tend to study hunting behavior, territorial behavior, and conflict, and hierarchy, and women tend to be more, and this is generalization, but it's pretty true, mother-infant studies and relationship studies, and much more kind of peaceful problem-solving kind of tool use studies. And it's not surprising that that's the case, I guess. I was more like Jane. I just love the mother-infant stuff, and I love following the females and watching them with their kids and just seeing how different they are with their kids. And, hate to say it, but not all human moms are good, and not all chimps should be moms. And the kids suffer for it. And again, that's coming from nature. That's not coming from us. There is no school of like, how do you be a good parent? And, some of the chimps who didn't get good, examples growing up don't really know how to be good parents, and some learn how to be good parents and some never do. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So we talked a little earlier about Jane being obviously this sort of almost like monolith, like the idea of what you think of when you think of going and just observing wildlife. At least that's what it's been for me my whole life. I can't speak for everyone else, but that's sort of like the main thing that comes to mind. And that comes with a huge responsibility. And, you have this huge weight on your shoulders to be like the voice for not only an entire field, but entire species almost. And I think the same can be true of what you do with presenting these animals in documentary form, in video form, because for a lot of people, this is their only real look at what it's like, because you can read about it in a textbook, but to see it actually presented in a particular way is an entirely different thing. So I know that generally speaking, to my understanding, you guys get like so many hours of footage, and you have to trim all of that down into like an hour-long segment. And it, human brains like narrativity, and so you have to sort of sculpt something out of all these hours and hours of footage. So I guess something that I'm personally interested in is how do you, and I guess how much control do you have over the process of paring down this footage into like absorbable information?
Well, there's so many interesting things that I could, go to just from that. I mean, Jane herself If you ever saw her speak or ever saw footage of one of her talks, it was a wonderful storyteller, and storytelling was what put her on the map. And she married the cinematographer who came to film the chimps, and so they together told the stories of the chimps quite accurately, in a way that was fascinating. If you get a chance to see People of the Forest or Jane Goodall and the Wild Chimpanzees, the early documentaries, they're just fascinating. The things that she retells through the footage, and so it's no accident that I got to do what I did. She as well saw the value in the moving image, and it wasn't until video cameras came along in the 80s that you could do the kind of research videography that I did, without a huge production budget. So my mandate wasn't filmmaking at all. I knew nothing about filmmaking. And for that matter, I knew nothing about chimps, which suited Jane as well. I was totally underqualified to do this.
You're a blank slate. That's a good thing.
Yeah. And so, I got to spend a lot of time learning elephants and, other wildlife in Tanzania. And I was always frustrated with my inability to tell visual stories with just a stills camera. You can never capture it all. And so when I came home, and before I went back to Gombe, to Tanzania, I bought a little Hi8 video camera, which is right up there. And Jane was delighted with that. And she said, well, I've just lost footage of Faustino being weaned. And I would love it if you can replace that footage for me. And so I started this long follow of Fifi, and followed her for 46 days and actually watched her giving birth. And then I actually got a videotape of Gremlin giving birth. And Jane said, well, why don't you just do this all the time so that we have a living, moving record to go along with 30 years at that time of research and, written for exactly the same reason you just said, so that we can have a visual record that we can share with the general public about all the amazing things that you see out there, document them and share them with the rest of the world. And that started as a research project, but then a film crew would come, and I knew the chimps, I knew their voices from a half mile away. I spent so much time with them, far more time with chimps than with humans, but crazy far. I would spend 12, 14 hours a day with them and maybe see a tourist once in a while and, talk to the researchers once in a while. But all of my time was with chimps and my camera. And so I just became so wrapped up in their individual lives and stories that I just felt a responsibility to tell those. And so that's, I guess in that way, my career does parallel Jane's. And we both came out of the forest for the same reason, so that we can do, interviews like this or the public speaking that she did. She was traveling 300 days a year, not only talking about chimps. It wasn't just about chimps. They're the flagship species and a keystone species for that habitat, but it was the entire ecosystem she's talking about. It's the entire equatorial forest she's talking about that. And she would say, if we lose chimps, if we lose the apes, we are next. We are one of the great apes, and if we lose them because of habitat loss, we can't sustain life on this planet. Those forests are the great filters of our air and water, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect chimps, which means everything I can do to protect every species in those forests right across the world. So it became a huge mission for her, and you're right. A lifelong almost duty to the chimps. She got so much from the chimps. I feel the same way, that I would do anything to protect them and save them.
Yeah, it was nice. She was on tour in America actually, just recently, her whole life, never stopped working. And it really does feel like an almost existential battle that conservation is fighting, and there's so many avenues to explore with that. But at the end of the day, flagship species, as you said, they're the most charismatic, presentable ones sometimes, and so it's super important to really get that across as these ambassadors of wildlife. But that actually does remind me of another little question we had here. So on my end, my first time seeing an ape in person in the wild was in Thailand, I was at a Khao Nong Rum. It's basically it's a pretty big like forest preserve. It's got like evergreen areas, more just anyways. A big part of the studies going on there was how much time they spent just getting the gibbons used to having humans sort of follow them. And that's something that sort of goes under, it's not talked about as much, but how do you think that, the chimps obviously knew that you were there, that you were watching them. Do you think that impacted their behavior at all, knowing that you were there? Or do you ever think you like caught them off guard? Or do you have any anecdotes about that?
Well, that habituation, that work that you're talking about is habituating another species to the presence of human. First, I want to talk about the dangers of that. Like it's a huge responsibility to habituate a group. Imagine habituating a herd of deer in your county somewhere. You go out and you get them used to follow you. You can follow them. You can go wherever they go. You can film them. Great for you. You can get amazing pictures and take data. And then fall comes around, it's hunting season. They all get wiped out.
Yeah,
they're not scared of humans anymore. There's a parallel to that in primate studies as well. If they're not afraid of us, which they should be, because we are scary and we have guns and arrows and we kill them for the bushmeat trade, which we can get to later. But equally, both researchers and tourists can carry diseases to the to the apes, which is another huge responsibility, that we can keep them safe. We haven't always done a very good job with that, and we're realizing now that it's one of human disease is one of the leading causes of ape mortality, and so I have mixed feelings. I started for Jane as a habituator for an adjacent community, and so for science, it's amazing because the females in the study group would grow up and leave, and we wouldn't know what happened to them. So we studied them for 12 or 13 years, and then bye-bye, they're gone. Now that the adjacent community has been habituated, we get to meet them again and see them again and see, if Fifi, the matriarch and the highest ranking female, has babies that are also high ranking, confident females, and do they climb the social hierarchy and become leaders of their new communities without the support of mom. So these are scientific studies and just conversations that are really fascinating, which we can now answer, but now we also have to do everything we can do to protect them. Luckily, Gombe National Park is indeed protected in national park, and there's almost no poaching there. And in Mitumba, there's very little tourism. That's the northern study group. But still, we're still out there following them and possibly introducing diseases and so forth. So we have to be very, very careful about these things. Yeah. I hope I answered your question. I sometimes get off on these crazy tangents that I forget what the original question was.
No, that's okay. I actually have a follow-up to that. In that I know, when you're making a documentary and, you're using multiple different cameras nowadays and big telephoto lenses, you can get really close. You can get really close without having to be very close. I guess, over your career, how close are you getting physically to the chimps? Do they tell you when to back off? Do you kind of innately know that now? Are you 10 feet from them? Are you 100 feet from them? What does that look like?
So for safety for them, we did a lot of research, about how sputum particles charged out of your lungs, especially with a sneeze, how far do they travel? And, there's been a lot of work with this, especially concerning great apes. And it's about 21 feet that it's so that a sneeze is so kind of dispersed that there's much lower risk. And we wear masks as well.
Damn,
having said that,
COVID,
you'll see Jane in the early...
apart. We were getting each other sick all the time.
I laughed so hard. It's the same thing as the TSA taking your water. It was just something to make people feel safe. It had nothing to do with safety. 6 feet has zero to do with safety. It was just to make people feel like, oh, I'm taking charge of my life. 6 feet. And
wow.
As
to
people
get people out there
watched,
sooner.
I mean, we've seen chimps die of respiratory infections that were introduced by humans, and so we know a lot about this stuff. That part of the kind of COVID safety thing was just a joke, and so, but anyway, it's very serious. And I forget your question already, but but
how close were you when you were filming?
In the old days, way too close. We just didn't realize the dangers, and Jane as well realized that back in the early days, like we stopped the banana provisioning that you see in the early days, and she was interacting with chimps in the early days, and people see that, and one, it gives a terrible message that chimps it's okay to mess with them and to affect their behavior. And then we learn, like Jane and I talked about this a lot. No, we should be flies on the wall. If you see that you're changing their behavior in any way, you move away from them and back off. The kids are very curious, just like human kids or any other species kids, and they will watch you like a hawk. If you drop something, they'll run over and pick it up. They are curious. They want to know what's going on. So you have to be very careful about those things too. And, there's a debate about masks that, yes, they can keep stuff from, coming out of your mouth and, going towards the chimps. But imagine if you drop that mask and a chimp picks it up and chews on it, that's just disaster. And so we have to be thinking about this stuff all the time. And lenses as well. I mean, you might put a lens down and throw another one on your camera for speed, but a chimp can sneak up behind you and grab it, and you can't see the forest. Like look behind me in that blurry picture. That's a forest that you just can't see through. It's walls and walls of vegetation. The chimps can be anywhere, so you really have to be aware of where they are, and then back off when you can. And you don't have to run out of their way, but you just kind of back off to that safe distance. But yeah, my earlier footage was much closer, and they did sometimes interact with me, even though I would just keep filming. They would involve me in their play sessions and stuff. They're just curious, and they had no fear of humans because they'd already been studied for 32 years.
Yeah,
that stuff does not happen anymore at any of the field sites. It's just not responsible, and we know that now.
Yeah. I'm glad you also brought up the zoonotic disease transfer in the bushmeat trade. That was, I guess, our last two episodes were about those two things. We did an episode on like some factors driving the bushmeat trade, which has always been sort of a background discussion going on throughout our show, like what's driving this. And with zoonotic disease, there's also the risk now of the invasive monkeys in Florida. They're macaques, so they all carry the herpes B virus. And so that's, I just found out a couple weeks ago, and that's why I decided to make that episode, that in Hong Kong, someone just recently died of herpes B from a macaque bite. And so it's very interesting. And there's a lot stricter laws about feeding wildlife there, probably because of things like that.
I was going to say, before we get too far away from what my other question was what was your personal relationship with the chimps like? Like, were there some that liked you, that would see you and be happy? Were there some that maybe you didn't have a good relationship with? Like, what did that look like? Not really on an interpersonal level, but on an interpersonal level, right?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and it's a good question, but I always felt that it should be and was a one-way relationship, that if I came or went, they didn't care. They wouldn't even glance up. Like, I meant nothing to them. I never gave them anything that would, if they did try to interact with me, I wouldn't react in any way. So I just became like a tree or a rock or a baboon in the forest to them. Something that you might look up at or glance up at, but then forget about. And yet, like any other being we spend time with, we develop a emotional relationship and connection to. And the chimps who I really liked, and there are chimps who I didn't like very much, who were politically driven and these Machiavellian climbers. And I don't like humans like that, who
the
are
striver chimps.
So, yeah, exactly. I don't like humans like that, and I don't like chimps like that, who have those personality traits. And there are both. There are those who are laid back, and like Freud was awesome. just this laid back dude. He became alpha male, but just kind of by default. And he was just this, I don't know, just so, apolitical, non-political, and fun to follow. And Gremlin, probably my favorite female, who I saw giving birth to Gaia, and Gaia was born on Valentine's Day. So the point is, like, I'm totally head over heels, with these chimps, and I think about them all the time. Like right now, I'm thinking about Gremlin and Gaia. Gremlin's still alive. She's 56 now, and still has babies, and still having babies. Gaia helped raise the twins. Gremlin's the only female who raised twins in the wild because it's so difficult, and with the help of Gaia. So I think about them all the time, and yet they probably don't think about me at all. And even if I showed up, they wouldn't look at me any different than they look at a tourist, and that suits me absolutely fine.
Yeah. I do remember
nice.
the question I was trying to remember, but I can save that for later because I just remembered something else when you were talking about Freud. And then you talked about the Gaia, and I remembered, generally, I don't know if this is just a tradition. Maybe it was started by Jane Goodall, but naming groups like Group F, Group G, and then giving them all names that start with that letter.
Yeah.
But with Freud, I remember there was also a chimp named Frodo in that group, I think. And I remember vaguely a story. I think, was he the one that attacked Gary Larson, the Far Side cartoonist?
Yeah, and attack is a really, really strong word.
Yeah.
I hate to burst all your guys' bubbles. So, full disclosure here, I read your email about your background, and then I went to your site, and they were very, very opposite of what I expected.
Yeah.
We're very much not very serious.
Randomly go through a subject, and you guys are like way out there. It's like, oh my god, this is hilarious. To the point that like some of my colleagues are like, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
We have a good reputation then. Okay.
We actually had a discussion about whether or not I should do this, and I said, "No, these guys are cool. I saw them like they're very down with having intelligent conversation with about really important things." And so that was really
once
reassuring.
Every 6 or 7 episodes we can do.
Yeah,
yeah.
And that's not a slight at all. It's just like it's the way people communicate these days, and some of it's really funny, and some of it we could talk about, like what is that message, and what does that do to primates when you see visuals of a chimp around balloons. We can talk about that later, and I've already forgotten what your question was.
Well, yeah, it was about the F group. There was one.
Oh yeah,
the Frodo.
Yeah, so Frodo. Yeah, so we'll get back to that. So, bursting your bubble about chimp violence and all of these, questions about who is the toughest of all of the different apes and who would beat up who and so forth. Obviously, we are by far the weakest as human in so many ways, but we're the most dangerous as well. And we're the dumbest and smartest at the same time. We have all of these capacities, and yet we destroy our own habitat.
Yeah, sure.
And violent. I would say we're far more violent as well. I followed chimps for, since 1992. It's got to be 34 years. And serious violence maybe 2 or 3 times in all of that time. And you certainly couldn't say that about many human communities.
Yeah.
And they're all about bravado. You see them charging around, and you see them in nature films, and they're so misrepresented in the films that 90% of it is about somebody's trying to take somebody down so they can have the most desirable female and have all the resources. And yes, I don't want to sugarcoat it. There is some of that, and yet the vast majority of time they're living as any community does. They communicate, everything is to the nth degree. And so I'm upset, so I'm going to scream. Like, you and I don't do that. I'm upset, and so we're going to talk about this, or I'm going to walk out the door and slam the door. They scream at the top of their lungs, and they have major vocal outbursts, but that's just their way of dealing with things. But they don't often really attack and hurt one another. And so when we would occasionally get thumped by Frodo, you have to remember that he's 3, 4, 5 times our strength. If he wanted to, he could tear us limb from limb.
Yeah.
He never did. It was I never felt unsafe around chimps, and people would like to think of them as scary and like, how could you do that? And it's so brave, and it's like, no, not at all. It's absolutely safe to be around apes, and they are for the most part peaceful, gentle animals, which I wish we could portray more in our films and media. It's just hard to commission a film like that, but we do have a film coming out with PBS and BBC called Matriarchs, and it's about the mother-infant relationship and the role of female peacekeeping and cohesion within the community, which was took us 15 years to get that off the ground, and kind of inspired by my wife just being tired of the misrepresentation in the media of violent chimps, which just it is only 5% true in terms of their time.
Yeah, we definitely had a lot of we had a lot of fun with that a couple years ago when we were a bit more immature, but my thoughts on it have really sort of evolved in a way. Recently we put together an episode on primate violence in general, and my perception is so skewed by only working with captive primates, and I recognize that because primates in enclosures, whether they're super good enclosures or very poor enclosures, their social structures, their communities are a lot less stable, and there's so much more violence in like captive settings because in the wild, they have a stable society where everything's just sort of worked itself out and there's no need for violence. But because they use violence as a way to communicate social hierarchy and social slights against one another in unstable, sort of volatile situations in captivity, that explodes so much more often. And that's why, I think like a big factor impacting people's perception of violent chimps was obviously the Travis the Chimp attack, which we talked about in like our 5th episode or something. We were just like reading an article about it, and but it's something that was I think has stuck in the public conscience for so long, but it's kind of obviously an unfair representation of how or why chimps use violence, because it was a pet chimpanzee and they're not supposed to be pets.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? They aren't even supposed to be captive. Like, yeah, I agree that some facilities are better than others, and as your guest recently pointed out, who works with bonobos, some of these facilities are doing great conservation work, but it's still not very nice for the primates or any other animals in those facilities. Yeah. And when it comes to zoos, yes, have a great elephant or chimp or other enclosure for the kind of, again, the flagship species, and then you look at the others and like tiny little cages, and like, yes, they're doing a good job for a handful of species, but they're still all basically a sideshow that is trying to make money.
Yeah.
And so that I have a very hard time with captive primates that aren't, as your guest was saying, like kind of accredited and double checked and thinking all the time. Like I think you work with captive primates yourself. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so if I were you, I would be thinking all the time, like, how can we enrich their lives? How can we make this more, life more interesting for these primates? Because when you think about the wild, one of the things you're talking about, there are parallels to that violence and that kind of one of the only ways the males know to communicate is to charge at the other and kind of knock them out of the way. If the other one doesn't feel like they should submit and they don't submit, and they might challenge, this happens once in a while, they might come to blows. And sometimes they don't reconcile and they'll pursue them for a long time. The point is there are places to escape. You can get away.
Yeah.
You have friends who you can build alliances with and like slowly come back into the community and not get antagonized by the new alpha male if you're the former alpha. Yeah. And so there's all kinds of strategies. Yeah, you're not locked in a cell with them, so that you're, I think captive primates are a lot like unsupervised classrooms that have bullies that are encouraged to be bullies and benefit by being bullies. And, then all hell's going to break loose and it's going to be miserable for all of them. I don't think bullies are happy either, whether that's human or non-human. They're bullies for a reason, and it's because they're dealing with emotional issues. And so it is really hard for me to spend time around captive animals of any kind, because I've spent so much time in nature filming for production, for research, and then it's what I do for my own time. I was out a few days ago filming the salamander migration, and 2 weeks ago I was filming the crane migration in Nebraska, like two things that nobody should miss in life, but if you do, I've got great footage of it. And so it's just, I wouldn't want to see any of those amazing individuals and creatures and species in captivity, and yet we normalize it to the point that we think that that's their behavior, that when we see somebody own a chimp and get attacked, or own a tiger and get attacked and die, like we feel sorry for the person and not the tiger or the chimp or whoever it is that was in that situation and gets euthanized for it. And so it is complicated, but I think we just need to follow our hearts and use compassion in these situations and not sensationalize it. It's not because the chimp is violent and has sharp teeth. They have those things for a reason, for defense and sometimes for hunting, but they are so much stronger than us. We are no match for them. And so, bad things happen.
Yeah. I think with zoos especially, this is something we've talked about, where zoos started out obviously as just like a way to make money for people, like an entertainment facility. But as attitudes evolved over time, you have these massive multi-million-dollar facilities with all these animals that have nowhere else to go. And so there's sort of like this post ad hoc justification of, well, we're doing this for conservation and education, where it's like, yes, but also mostly just trying to do the best with these captive animals that you have. And I've volunteered at the North Carolina Zoo, and I don't know if they'd want me saying this necessarily. I don't know how open they are about this, but there's questions of when some of our most famous, well-known exhibits, when those animals pass on, we're not going to replace them because that would be kind of cruel. Yeah. Like, they don't want to bring another polar bear to North Carolina. And so when that polar bear goes, it just gets shuttered and they have to figure something else out. And it's a lot of people that are, well-meaning, but doing the best they can, I think. But it's absolutely true that it's making the best of a bad situation.
Yeah. I think so. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and the quality of those zoos varies so wildly. The North Carolina Zoo, for all intents and purposes, the North Carolina Zoo is one of the best zoos in the country, if not the world. But I lived for quite some time, I lived in Salt Lake City, and you go to the Utah Zoo, the Hogle Zoo, and I don't think I care what they think about this, but their primate enclosure was not great. For the amount of apes that they had in there, and quite honestly, the hot, dry desert climate of Utah, they had a completely open, it was a pit. They were in a pit, the classic, this is where we keep the monkeys in a pit type of exhibit. And, how are their lives being enriched?
Exactly. And, what is their quality of life? It's a prison. And many, start hair plucking. They have these stereotypic behaviors. They start going crazy, just like you. Imagine if we were all kind of locked in a house for the rest of our lives with no outlook of ever escaping. it is about as cruel as you could possibly be to another creature. And now that we do recognize that not just apes, not just primates, but everything out there has their own, cats and dogs you have, who have incredibly different personalities. Like some will just be in your face and just all over the place. Others are lazy and want to just relax and eat like as different as the four of us are.
Yeah.
And as similar as well, with similarities and bonds that are so important. And I don't think that any of that's considered when you're kind of dealing with the general public. And, you're unfortunately, most zoos put more into the public's experience in terms of funding than into the species who they keep. And another question that you did mention was climate compatibility with a species. Is it okay to have tropical animals in the north?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in upstate New York, and like 90% of the people I know hate it, hate the weather here. Imagine if you're a chimp from Africa living in these northern climes. Basically means that you're stuck inside all the time, and that's the most unnatural thing for humans and non-human animals alike. Like being inside all the time is just so boring.
Yeah.
Even enrichment, like when you think about chimps and the way they walk in the wild and things they come up against and come to in the forest with every step, it's new and different. It might be an insect, it might be a elephant shrew, it might be a vine that's fun to swing on. Chimps who are given enrichments, let's say peanut butter and a fake termite mound, well, they do that for 15 or 20 minutes and then they're bored. They're smart and they want to do something else. And the fact is that we just don't have the person power and the funding to do what's right. And so I totally agree with what you say. Let's just start aging them out, letting them go, not replacing them, and start coming up with other, alternatives for zoos and captive facilities. And hopefully in a generation or two or, 100 years or so, all of these things will be considered as barbaric as, you can own a chimp. Well, yeah. Not that long ago, you could own another human. We consider that appalling. And believe it or not, apparently human slavery is still going strong in a lot of the world. I think a lot of people don't know that, but just because of the sheer number of humans on the planet, there are probably more slaves now than there ever have been.
Yeah,
something to think about. And so, these are very sombering things that people don't like to think about. But when it comes to captivity with these species who we've taken responsibilities for, and these individuals, I love to talk about them on an individual basis. That, well, this one seems fine. Well, how do you measure that, and how do you know what's fine for her? How do you know what's fine for him? They're just not breathing and eating, and so they're okay. It takes a lot more to have a healthy mind than just those things, and that about yourself. And you could give a front of being okay, like all of us do it. They're not okay in these situations, and hopefully we will get away from that someday.
Yeah. I actually my thesis was on basically like stress behaviors, like a bit more in depth than that, but stress behaviors was like a big thing. I was basically making those huge Excel sheets with like all the timestamps of the behaviors and writing what the behaviors were. But yeah, no, there's the interesting thing I found from that is that in this was at the Duke Lemur Center where I was doing my thesis. All of the red ruffed lemurs, their vocalizations are super loud. I'm sure you're familiar, but yes. I noticed that when they heard the vocalizations of other lemurs from the facility, like their neighbors, they responded and acted pretty normally. But there was a vastly different response when they heard a lemur that they'd never heard. So, in my mind, that's, even in captivity with animals that don't see each other, they're in different parts of the zoo or sanctuary or what have you, they can still hear each other. So they're still like socializing. They have like a little mini network almost of communication. It's interesting. Stuff like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that it's soothing to them to hear one another, and it's not surprising at all that primates do compete for space and territory, and when they hear somebody they've never heard before, they react. Chimps go nuts when they hear somebody from the neighboring community, and it's really exciting because they all raise their hair and they charge around and they'll respond to those calls. But the vast majority of the time, like if they don't have like major numerical superiority, they're not going to touch the other. They're just going to run up and down the sides of the hills and like try to knock over trees and things and just show how tough they are without actually having any physical contact at all. So that's just part of who they are. And even with their own community, like with chimps, if you're not a high-ranking male, one of the strategies to have babies is to take females away with them when they're not in estrus, so there's no competition over the female, and they take them away on kind of a honeymoon or a consortship, is what Jade called it. And if they're gone for a couple months, and then all the males hear, let's say it was Apollo who had taken the female away. They hear his voice, and they all charge towards him, and like there's always a big fanfare of like this reunion again. So they're very, very communicative vocally, and they know each other's voices. I mean, I know their voices. Imagine the information that they can understand among each other. And I know the different vocalizations in different contexts. There's a museum, a traveling museum exhibit called Becoming Jane that's going to all the science museums across the country right now from Geographic. And I did a thing called Chimp Chat. So I teach you like 5 different vocalizations, and then AI judges you whether or not you can duplicate or mimic that vocalization up to chimp standards. So that's really fun.
Yeah, so we recently have been talking a bit more about like non-native invasive species as they, we introduce things all around the world, things are introduced here. And one thing that has been happening more and more lately is non-native primates being introduced to North America. Specifically, I know there is a decent-sized community of... can you remind me what type of monkeys they are?
So in Florida,
macaques.
It's mostly around Silver Springs, but where the macaques and squirrel monkeys are. But there's also like 200 vervet monkeys around Fort Lauderdale area.
I guess what are your thoughts on that? Like, what would you do? I guess if you got the magic wand and you could decide what to do with those kind of things.
Yeah, like
tomorrow. I guess how would you approach it?
So this is one of these philosophical questions that, as a pacifist, which cruel is it to be kind to? So let's say you're a bird person. So I'm crazy about birds as well, and so I have my binoculars all the time, and I'm watching birds all the time. So there's a couple issues with both invasive species and both of which, and one is right here. Chewy, that was our cat, or the cat.
I'm sure you've seen my cat, who's been over here, who owns me.
So I'll start at this level. So native birds don't compete well against starlings, who were introduced because of a fan of Shakespeare. I think introduced 23. There's some passage in I think Macbeth that he mentions 23 pairs of starlings. Introduced them in Central Park in the early late 1800s, and now one of the most, in terms of population, largest species in the United States, and one of the most aggressive in the bird world. And the other one is the house sparrow, or English sparrow. Super prolific. They'll have 5 clutches or 4 clutches to every native bird's 1 or 2. And they will take nesting habitat of the native species. So do you be kind and do your best to eliminate the handful of species that's creating monocultures, or do you leave it alone and let them kill all the native species? And I don't have the answer to that. I've been on both sides of that argument. I mean, I think the kindest thing you can do to like Mother Earth as a whole is to try to encourage as much biodiversity as possible, or diversity. It doesn't, biodiversity or diversity, either way you want to look at it. In that, the healthier Mother Earth is, the healthier we are. And we can't be healthy if there's just one species of tree anymore. We can't be healthy if there are just a handful of species of birds. Is it smart for us just to let nature take? There's a scientific and philosophical community who says, well, let's just let nature take its course. If we do that, if we let just a handful of really aggressive species take over and create monocultures where, and this is true in botany as well, and we lose diversity, our chances of survival will plummet. We rely on native species in the soil that we don't even know exists to keep our internal fauna and flora flourishing. We don't even know about these things. There's so much that we don't know about that we shouldn't be tinkering with the formula that we evolved into for the last 6 million, 16 million, and then what is it, 60 million years, so and beyond. So
yeah.
What do I feel about primates in Florida? They are wreaking havoc on the bird populations, on the native plant populations, vervets will eat anything. I've spent a lot of time around vervets, and they are feeding machines, both terrestrially. They're happy on the ground, they're happy in the canopy, they eat everything. You can't introduce a species like that and not have major impact. I honestly believe there should be some kind of humane elimination of them from the wild. And I would put a lot of money into it now, because what we don't spend now, we will pay for in the future. Invasive species cost us billions and billions, maybe trillions of dollars as a species a year. And a lot of these things can be avoided just by being responsible. I don't know what to say about the starlings and house sparrows now. It does feel awful to and it's not even very popular to start an elimination plan of starlings. And is that very practical? Maybe on a case-by-case basis, that if there's a critical habitat with endangered species that are being threatened by these birds, maybe there's an argument there. But it is very complicated. We could talk a whole hour about this subject alone.
Yeah, I'm sure.
As a botanist and somebody like a huge fan of diverse ecosystems, it breaks my heart when I find out about a species like Phragmites. Do you know about this? It's a tall grass species that's taking over the wetlands of North America, creating, where Phragmites exists and is thriving, there's about 90% less diversity in that wetland. So imagine all the species that I go out there to just to be around, and who I was talking about, my brothers and sisters in the plant and animal kingdoms, and are all gone in these stands of Phragmites that go as far as the eye can see. And the biologists and botanists, we don't even know what to do with them. And a lot of these species were introduced on purpose. So
yeah,
you're in a topic that I think about all the time, and
there's no easy answer.
There's no easy answer.
No,
and, there's a similar parallel with animals who are in captivity and absolutely miserable. From a compassionate point of view, you can try to do something to move that individual to another situation, but if not, is euthanasia ever an option? Do we ever have that right? Again, it's a very tough philosophical question, but I think if it were me in many of those situations, I wouldn't want to be alive anymore if I knew that was going to be me the rest of my life. And that's one way of looking at the question, is from your own point of view.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do get a bit of criticism from at least one viewer of this show, because I always fail to consider the bird angle. I whenever I talk about animal language, they're like, "Why are you talking about bird songs and bird language?" And I will say, most recent episode, we found this article at the very end that we started reading, and it was talking about how there are some primatologists in South Florida who were like, maybe we should consider conservation protections for these vervet monkeys in the area since they're already here, and it might be impractical to try to do an extermination campaign. But when I think of primates, I usually think, they're such an important species, obviously like spreading seeds around from plants and just generally being a good bio indicator. But
yeah,
I also just remembered, like, when you were talking about birds earlier, the thought like zapped across my mind. I was like, oh wait, these vervets and macaques, they're definitely like eating bird eggs, just like
there's
crazy.
no safe mammal or bird that's smaller than a vervet in that whole habitat. I guarantee it is denuded of most bird life now. And that's what I'm talking about with biodiversity. It's tragic that one species, whether it be a tiny little fungus or insect or massive, system like this Phragmites, or something like a primate, will have major impact on everything around it. I mean, look at us. We're the biggest scourge, aren't we? Look what we can do in just 100 years to an entire continent.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important angle too about the philosophy of, where is extermination, or these extermination policies, and like where do we get off with tampering with the starlings or the monkeys? But like, Mother Nature can adapt. The only thing that is the issue with these invasive species is that we have sped up some process that has, collided ecosystems that should not have collided in any way.
Yeah.
And like, do we take responsibility for that, or do we allow it to play itself out and like see what happens with the ecology? Like, do we have the authority to do either of those things?
Any of those things, yeah. And again, it might be a case by case basis that if you see Phragmites starting in an area that has box turtles, like critically endangered turtle in the Northeast. Yeah, you might go in there with a group of kids and do some education and pull all the Phragmites out and try to mitigate that issue. Or if there are other turtles who are invading that range, you might eliminate them. Because if you don't, you will lose a lot of these species who are living on the edge right now. I mean, with birds alone, like, here's a shout out to your bird person. You can love primates and birds at the same time and with equal fervor. 70 years ago, or 1970, there was an estimated number of North American birds, and it was a pretty thorough one. Today, that number is 50% of the 1970 estimate in terms of sheer numbers. So we have lost in mass 50% of the native birds of the Americas since 1970. So I think it is worth the fight. I think, yes, on that philosophical level, it is important to consider how you do these things. And there are some cases that it probably is important to mitigate the damage of an invasive species. But you wouldn't want to, you don't want to just a bunch of people going out with shotguns blowing everything away. There are ways and there are ways of doing these things. And if we couldn't do it in a way that is both humane and fairly quick, maybe we just take the loss, we take the hit. And you're right. We're going to see what happens. Do you guys know about this? And I'm going to misquote whoever came up with it, but it's this idea that every generation, the next generation, is accepting a massively diluted ecosystem, around them than the previous generation. And so your bar of what's okay is so different from what my bar is, because you're probably I'm 60. You guys are probably in your 20s and 30s, right? Yeah. So there's probably been a couple generations between us. And my bar coming from like rural Oregon was pretty high. I think kids now are seeing, like, we so influence, and the two generations after mine were not very responsible with, they considered everything out there a commodity, rather than a gift.
Yeah.
that needs to be nurtured and stewarded and not managed, but considered an absolute gift and something to be thankful for. And I think most people look at it a completely different way. Like, oh, there's money in them hills, and they're going to go out and extract everything they can.
Yeah.
And that's just the way we colonized this area, and that's why the indigenous people thought we were such barbarians, both in the way we treated women, one, and the way we treated the environment, too.
Yeah.
And I think their philosophy is holding much stronger.
Yeah.
I think a matriarchy right now would be a much beneficial thing around the world, of people who are actually thinking about the quality of life for everyone, not for a handful of oligarchs. And two, just the way they treat the environment, and they consider the environment with every step taken. And do I have permission? I like the way you worded that. Do we have permission to do these things? Sometimes no. Sometimes it's not okay to go in there and harvest mushrooms. Like, if that's the last stand and you've only seen one stand of mushrooms all day, what right do I have to go in there and take them? And that's a very kind of indigenous way of looking at things. And yet, in the long run, we'll all benefit from that kind of philosophy of just being gracious, thankful, and just acknowledge that we have an impact on the planet, and we might as well make it a positive one. That's plagiarizing Jane, but every day we have an impact, and that's okay, isn't it? For all the Jane, I hope there aren't any Jane haters, but all the people who either mix her up with Diane Fossey or don't understand fully who she is.
Yeah, I don't even think we're Diane Fossey haters. I think we have discussed in depth,
it's nuanced. It's nuanced.
Yeah, okay.
There's a big difference in what she did. But
it's very nuanced. We've talked about how tricky that type of stuff is.
Yeah.
It is so tricky, and until you walk in somebody's shoes, no matter how. So Frodo is a great example of this. No matter who you are, you're not just one thing. So everybody thought of Frodo as the bully, and he's the one chimp I saw actually attacking a chimp from the neighboring community. 4 males from the community that I was with did catch a member of the other community and attack that individual. And yet the next day, he'd be the first adult chimp to be playing and wrestling and tumbling on the ground with his tiny little nephew, who's smaller than his head, and the most willing to get out there and spend his time, making the lives of his family members better. And so, humans aren't just one thing either. And where am I going with this? I know I have a very good point here, but I forgot what I was.
I don't remember.
I got the photo.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, but there's a really good point here about, I guess, our role that. Oh, we were talking about Diane Fossey.
Yeah.
And, people judge her for her absolute worst times and, worst behavior. And, until we walk in her shoes, which one of us would not do everything they could do to defend those who we love? She loved the gorillas. I can't imagine what I would do if somebody went after Gremlin and Gaia. And I found their dead bodies decapitated with their hands gone.
Yeah.
What level of crazy might I go? And I'm not a crazy guy. I'm not a violent guy. I'm a very level-headed person. And I have no idea, living alone in the forest, what was going through her mind. And, was anything that she did justified? I don't know. I can't judge her because I wasn't there living that. I think we're just way too... Well, one, we have this thing called trolls now.
Yeah.
Just like to say things for the hell of it. And two, people are just we're so judgmental now. And I think we need to take a step back just for our fellow creatures on the planet. And let's take the judgmental hat off and just be nice to each other.
Yeah.
Be nice to Diane. She did a lot of good, and she was out there doing her best to protect the gorillas. And maybe she didn't make all the great decisions that could have been made, but maybe she was doing something to protect the rest of the community that she thought was under serious threat the next day. And there's a lot of nuances to this. She did go after the middle people. She did go after the funding people, and she did raise awareness to a major degree about the trade of great apes. And so, I have a lot of time for her as well. And admitting that she didn't always make good decisions.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like we haven't even gotten to talk about bushmeat. We haven't even gotten to talk about all this other stuff that I know that we're all so invested in.
Honestly, I think we should have you on a second time. I think this has been awesome.
Amazing talking with
you.
I will say.
Just chatting,
yeah. No, it's important to talk about this stuff.
Right.
I have no social media presence because I just if I had a social media site, I would say get off your ass and go outside. And
that was going to be our. That's that's really funny. That's usually the last thing we ask is where can we find you? But if you don't have social media, where can we find you?
So there's this place above this waterfall behind me that it's just beautiful, and but I'm not going to tell you where the waterfall is.
Up there, don't tell us. Keep that one secret. Keep that one secret.
Wander.
But if I do meet you out looking at salamanders, I will share some great stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, a little Lord of the Rings reference for you. Not all who wander are lost.
Yeah.
We're thinking of you,
Tolkien.
Frodo.
Jane was a big fan of Tolkien, and
did Jane name Frodo?
Oh yeah, Jane named Frodo.
Oh yeah,
Tolkien as well. There was a Tolkien, and we were constantly talking about Tom Bombadil, and
wow.
Like for the people who haven't seen the films and so forth, like the real character Miss in the films was Tom Bombadil, who was this like. He was like my twin brother in some ways.
Yeah, and funnily enough, he's basically God in those books. When you read those books, he's basically God. Tolkien talks about him the way you talk about the Catholic God. It's very interesting. And
well, he didn't know that. What?
Yeah, because okay, we're gonna get way off topic.
We're in the weeds.
We're gonna get way off track. We're gonna get way off track.
See you next time. We should talk about Bombadil.
I think
he was an awesome primate living in a forest. And so are all these other primates. Or at least
and you can't see them without going outside. And I think you had the perfect message for our listeners. No offense to our listeners, but I think the perfect message to end on is to get off social media and go outside sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think our lives depend on it. Like, get up in the morning and just go outside and see what's around, and listen to a bird. And if you don't know who she is, like, do a little digging and get curious. I mean, Jane was endlessly curious. That's what, like, she had that 6-year-old, 7-year-old childlike curiosity through her life. And I think we can take many pages from Jane's books.
Yeah,
absolutely. Get out there and enjoy it, and breathe deeply and listen to water. Like next time we can talk about like chimps' fascination with water and their emotional reactions. When they see a waterfall or rushing water, they dance by themselves just out of I think joy. It's amazing.
Wow.
Absolutely. And trust me, we will be emailing you to get you on a second time. This has been awesome. Right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Bill, philosopher, naturalist, cinematographer.
Go check out
all around, I guess.
Some of those documentaries that, if you haven't watched them somehow, check them out.
If you haven't seen Planet Earth at this point in your life, go watch Planet Earth at the bare minimum. At the bare minimum.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Well, great talking to you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on.
Great talking to you too.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.